One of the things that I did want to ask you, and it was always interesting to me, and because I know that you're a former police officer, right? So
Yes.
you were fighting crime literally on the streets, you know, putting people. And I know that for a lot of fraud, people who work with fraud and people who work in compliance as well, right? One of the things that always kind of limiting for us is that we can catch the transaction, we can catch a bad merchant, we can catch a bad guy, then we submit a report, we submit a SAR, and that's the end of it. We don't, in many cases, we don't even know if something happened with this SAR, if somebody was put behind the bars. And so like police people who actually arrest people, they're like, next level. But you went the other way. And I know, again, also a lot of compliance people that they do think that when you go and you start working with the regulations, it's actually taking this thing to a bigger level and fighting crime on the bigger level. So I wanted to ask what you think about it, and why did you make this transition in your career?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's one of those things where the skill sets that you learn as a police officer, and it doesn't matter at what level of police officer you are, whether you're a police officer walking the beat or whether you're a specialist officer. I did all sorts when I was in the police. But you develop a skill set that is very, very usable as a compliance or AML CFT officer. Um, you even down to the barrage of regulations and legislations. So there's simple things like reading a piece of legislation. It's a tricky thing to do. Legislation is written in a very particular language, legal speak, that's quite difficult to understand. There's a lot of cross-referencing. Whereas that's something, I mean, lawyers obviously too, but that's something that police officers do in their daily lives, because you learn all this law and then you have to go out and practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And then because you might be dealing with a law that you've not dealt with for the last 12 months or something, every time that you deal with a new case like that, you research it. So you're used to reading and digesting legislation and understanding what it means. And of course, that's what regulation is. It's legislation turned into rules of governance for control for a certain industry. Doesn't matter what the industry is, whether it's financial services, manufacturing has huge levels of compliance and
Mm-hmm.
safety. And it's understanding that complicated, it's almost as if they can't just write down a very common sentence and say, this is how you do it. It's hidden behind this very complicated speak. But there's these other skill sets that you build. Obviously, the obvious ones like investigation skills, the fact that you've got a huge level of experience. If you've been a police officer for over 2 years, you've dealt with hundreds, if not thousands of jobs that come out of the left field. And you have to work out, I mean, obviously this goes higher if you end up as a detective and your investigation skills grow. But you spend most of your working life, especially when you're dealing with criminals, or people are lying to you. So you have a way of picking up the truth from what's not. And we rely on what's called our gut feeling and whatever. But really, it's not a gut feeling. It's something that's based on experience. And you have that level of experience. So that transfers directly when you're doing investigations. But also, you've spent, as a police officer, you've spent many years dealing with high intensity situations. And you've got very little information at the start. You arrive at the scene of an incident and you have to decide what's going on very quickly and
Mm-hmm.
take action. And you have to separate that in your mind. Now that transfers to a huge amount of things, something that we'll probably talk about a bit later, about the barrage of regulations and the pressure that you get. As for a police officer, you're used to dealing with that pressure. You're used to dealing with that, having to make a decision on your feet and assessing all of the really key risks at that moment that should inform your decision. So you get all of these different types of skill sets that are transferable. So that's a technical skill benefit of moving from one to another.
Okay.
But then you've got the fact that you deal with criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you're dealing with ML and CFT regulations, it's very easy to do your day-to-day job and think, oh, I'm having to follow the regulations so we can keep our license or we don't have any customers. But it's actually a bigger picture than that. Organized crime, and I'm talking proper organized crime here,
Mhm.
people smuggling, international drugs trades, the large organized crime groups that we've all heard of, that you see of in the movies, the Medellin cartels, the triads, the Yakuza. These are all magical names that appear in movies, but they're not. They're real entities that really exist. And when you're a police officer, especially if you're a specialist police officer like myself, I was a specialist firearms officer.
Okay.
And in the UK, that's really obviously in the US, all officers are armed and deal with because of the level of danger there. But in the UK, firearms, what are called Section 5 firearms, they're completely illegal in the UK. The only people who are allowed to use them are certain specially trained police officers.
Okay.
And of course, when you have that kind of job, you are dealing with the higher end of crime, not necessarily dealing with the investigations, but you get to see it on a day-to-day basis that it isn't part of the movies, that it
Mhm.
is real life, that there are real victims to this. And it's not just the victim of the crime, it's their families, their relatives, their future, their career. You see the massive impact this level of organized crime has on your society. And then when you come to the understanding that when you work in the financial services, the law enforcement can't do it on their own, and no organized crime agency can operate without huge, vast sums of money. And so that money's got to go somewhere. And so there's a real reason why compliance officers do what they do. They might think that they sit and look at Excel sheets all day and try and work out anomalies or patterns, report it, as you say, and then send it off, and you never hear about it again. But to law enforcement, that information is massively useful because they can't do it on their own. If they had to do it on their own, then organized crime would be by far the biggest business in the world, and that's that. Whereas with the help of industry, and not just within the financial services, in other industries, you know, high value car dealerships, there are other industries where police get information from. Now, those SARs that we submit, only a small percentage of those actually get used for active investigations, where there's enough information for a law enforcement officer to say, okay, I need to go and speak to the inspector or the boss because this really looks like we've got a case here.
Mhm.
But for even those ones where it's not investigated, there's a suspicion that something's been involved in organized crime there, or some sort of money laundering, or even lower end fraud or drugs. And that information is stored. And there have been quite a few examples that I'm aware of where that tiny little piece of the picture is what fits a whole case together. So it might not be that they take the whole of your information provided, but it might be the address or the location of offender that they're not particularly worried about the low end scam, but that name and that address means a lot.
Mhm.
And that
Mm.
is saved in obviously the databases that share with law enforcement around the globe. And so this information can be really useful. And without what compliance officers do, genuinely, compliance officers should give themselves a pat on the back, especially those who are involved in anti-money laundering, should give themselves a pat on the back at the end of every day, because they really do contribute to the safety of our societies and community. There's a bigger moral picture.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing about police officers, because they've had hands-on and they've dealt with that, and it isn't just a movie or a documentary, and they've seen it hands-on physically. They've sat and held hands with the victims and hugs them whilst their lives are falling apart. These police officers understand that there's a real reason that we do this, you know, and without it, there would be many, many more victims of crime.
That's inspiring. I mean, really. You mentioned that there are a lot of pressure. There is a lot of pressure that compliance officers, compliance people have to deal with. And
Yes.
I know that in your line of work, in your career, you were reporting officer and compliance officer for not very big financial organization, which then grew to be a very, very big international company. So can you just tell me a little bit about what kind of, you know, hard things, like what is the most difficult thing for from your perspective for a compliance officer for a smallish company, financial company, for a big, very big company? Maybe one is easier than another, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, hey, look, there's so many facets to understand. The first one really is knowing where you're at. And when I say you're at, I mean you, your position in your company, the culture of that company, how big the company is, what industry it's in. So for example, you know, I mean, it was only what, 12 years ago or so, when we had the big de-risking of MSBs, and they were the devil to banking, and you know, all the MSBs had to fight for their positions. Now it's pretty commonly accepted that payment services is out there. It's not an issue. Whereas crypto is seen very differently than a traditional bank, or even nowadays a payment service. So it depends. You've got to understand where you're at, and that's not just sort of like the company you work for. That's your position in the industry, the jurisdiction that you're based in, or where your sites are set at. You've got to understand the size and the culture of your company as well, because all of these things affect how you're going to do your job. There's a massive knock-on effect depending upon whether you're working for a small startup or whether you're working for an intermediary company, and that has a direct effect on the type of work you do. So for example, you might be a director of compliance, but working for a startup, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to be physically writing procedure documents.
Okay.
Now, in a much larger organization where you're a director of compliance and there's 300 compliance officers working for that company, you are never going to touch your fingers on a keyboard and type out a policy document. Or you might give guidance, but you're not going to do the physical work. So the level of type of work is different. But I think if you have worked in different stages of a company, it makes any stage of where you're working out a lot easier. So for example, if I'm working for a larger company and I'm having to give directions on, I need this policy doing, I need procedures, we're moving into a new jurisdiction, and we need a marketing procedure of how we can be compliant when we're marketing there. If previously, in a previous life, I've written those documents, I understand what I'm asking of my staff. So I think it gives a huge level of growth and understanding if you can work in different ones. Now, of course, there are people who've gone straight from university or college and they've started as an analyst in a large bank and they've stayed with that entity. And what they will deal with on a day-to-day basis is very, very different, because they're part of a large organization with inbuilt culture and and you have to operate within those confines. Whereas if you work for a startup, and again, it depends where you were. I was very, very blessed to be able to work with an American-Israeli company that was very young, but the level of innovation in Israel is just unbelievable. And you can start off with a clean slate, and you've got all these amazing ideas around you to help build something, which is very different from an established company, because you're battling with the old culture, legacy systems. You can't just have a new facial recognition on your IDV, because that will affect your back office, and there's a huge technological. So when you're working for a larger company, the problems are different, but they're still there. You've got to combat all these different types of ensconced beliefs. And if they're the wrong ones, or if they're not modern like your company needs to be, you've got to then change the culture. It's not just, I've got to rewrite some policies. You've then got to change the culture of the C-suite and how you do things. So for a larger company, the skill sets that you learn in those smaller companies are absolutely valuable, but it is very, very different. Yes, ultimately your position is the same. Your salary might be akin if you're working for a smaller company, but the level of work you have to do, manual work effectively, what you might call busy work if you're in a smaller company, yeah, that's there. And then, of course, you've got to think about the further implications and knock-on effects from that. So if I'm working for a large company and we're moving to a new jurisdiction, I haven't just got to think about me, and I haven't got to think about my company that I'm working for. What are my banking partners and my payment partners going to think of doing business in Venezuela? What are they going to think of that? So you've got to, when you've got this big behemoth that's grown, it hasn't just grown on its own. It's got lots of little attachments. Those might be licenses. You've got to keep regulators happy. You've got to keep your banking partners happy, depending on whether you are owner founded or whether you are part of a company that has taken venture capitalist money or investment rounds. Then you've got other people. You've got your shareholders to keep happy. You've got to make money as well. So depending upon the size and scale of your business, it really expands who you've got to think about. But there's also the other knock-on effect. As a well-established bank of over 40 years, if you mess up, you try going to the regulator and giving them an excuse that is going to matter. If you're a brand new startup and you have a mess up, then your regulator hopefully might be a little bit more understanding and guide you in the right direction. So the knock-on effects can be
Really?
different.
Oh, I thought it should be the other way around. I thought the more established you are, the more regulators are coming. And this is what we're seeing lately, right? The regulators are coming after big established names. They're not giving them any slack anymore. So I thought this is where what happens.
Yeah, I mean, this does happen, and that's because it depends who those entities are, but regulators are under a lot of pressure as well. They're just trying to do a job, and they're under a lot of pressure from. Don't forget that the trouble rolls downhill, you know, and if there are issues with a certain industry, if there are financial collapses, there are ministers in that government that want answers, and where do they go? They go to the regulator, and that pressure comes on those important people, and we've been seeing that since 2008.
I think
Yeah,
Wirecard
they would perhaps
crisis.
be harsher on them, because you should know that if you've been in business for 40 years as a bank, you should know the rules and you should know what to do. Just because you've done it that way for 30 years doesn't mean that you can get away with it when the regulator turns around and says, hang on a minute, you can't do that. But if you're a smaller entity, especially if you're proactive and you go to the regulator and say, look, we're not sure we're doing this right and we need your help, you're probably not going to get fined. But also the knock-on effects are different. So if you get a bank or a large name that gets in trouble with a regulator, the knock-on effects are different because you've got a bigger reputation to fail. You've got a bigger set of relationships where if your other banking partners or your investors start to say, well, this is not good, the knock-on effect is massive because usually they've invested more money. So they step back and you end up in a difficult situation. Your reputation is really, really key here. Whereas if you're a smaller entity, yes, it can go both ways and it could perhaps ruin it from the start, but it's much more likely that if you make a mistake and you stand up and you own to it and say, look, we're learning, we're getting there, we're building, you know, and you get the help from the regulator and you get advice and you start building and you show commitment to, then the knock-on effect, and you haven't got as many damages to your reputation. So that it really is, they're very, very different beasts, and the skill sets you use within each are very similar. But if you're working for a larger company, especially one if it's well established, then you've really got to keep your eye on the ball more. And then you go another stage as a company, you get larger and larger, and you become a public entity. The scrutiny is much, much higher because not only are your shareholders investors, but they're the general public as well, or they can be, and you've got a lot more to answer to. So the pressure gets heavier, and it seems less like a playground when you're coming up with these innovative ideas and you're part of a small setup and it's all very exciting. It gets very serious very quickly when you grow.
But is there something exciting about being a compliance officer for a very, very big company? Apart from all the money.
Yeah, yeah. Well, normally your salary is a little higher, but it really depends upon the culture of the company and how it's run. And it depends upon what type of company it is as well. So there's a big difference between working in one of the world's most large established banks as to working in one of the world's most large crypto exchanges. So it depends upon the culture of what you work, the company you work for. If, like, I've been absolutely blessed in my history, whereas all of my C-suite and executives understand the need for compliance, and without it, you don't do business. Or the business that you get is not the type of business that you want if you're not compliant. So I've been very lucky in that the C-suite, when I go to them and I say, look, as long as it's evidenced, and as long as it's, you know, I mean, this is another thing that most compliance officers really in the modern world should be. We're not the brown suited team that says no. We're not the business prevention department. We should be going to C-suite and saying, look, if you've got this culture and you can do that, then you can change how things are done. I'm not sure how it would be if you work for a large established entity where you get to a certain level and they turn around and say, no, that's not how we do things here. Because for a compliance officer, that puts you in a very awkward position. You know that you're probably not going to be compliant. And so you've got to work out ways that you and your team can stay on the right side of the law and try and protect the company and the officers that work for it, especially if some of those officers in the C-suite are kind of do see compliance as the old school business prevention department and don't accept that really you can't go to market without compliance, then that would be a real uphill struggle. And I think overall, the company itself would suffer over time for that. but it's working for a larger company. It can be harder to change things. Like I said before, you know, all your policies have existed, your culture, how you do things, your legacy systems, your technology, if you need to change something in a larger company, one of the biggest ones, the excitement comes from, how am I going to do this internally?
Okay.
Logistically, this is a nightmare. I've got to convince all these people in different departments. And not only have I got to convince IT that we need a new system, I've then got to go to the bosses and convince them that it's going to be worth the $2 million that I've got to spend on it. And so your challenges are different, and there's a lot more logistical consideration when you're dealing with a larger company.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. You mentioned about going to different jurisdictions, and this is something I practically know nothing about, like how it actually works. What does compliance need to do, apart from figuring out what exactly the regulations they're like, what is the main challenge? What are the main challenges there when you take your company someplace else where they didn't operate before? What for, like, things that definitely need to be taken into consideration, kind of partners maybe you're looking for, or I don't know.
So, I mean, again, this really depends upon what sort of industry you're in. It's, you know, there's a massive difference from established banking entities as to crypto entities, and how they're seen by the regulator and governments on a whole. There's a very big difference as to how that is. So it depends upon your industry. It depends upon the jurisdiction, because it depends. The knock-on effect from, if you're in crypto, you look at jurisdictions very differently than if you're in traditional banking, because there are certain jurisdictions, if you're a crypto firm, that are very pro crypto, and there's certain jurisdictions that are very negative. But really, it all starts off with research. Again, it's understanding where you're at, what sort of company am I in, how big is that company, what sort of resources does that company that I'm working for have. And then when you get a new jurisdiction that you want to move to, or C-suite says, look, you know, or marketing, we want to expand into this, it comes down to research, investigation. And you've got to look at what the legislation and regulation is, and then you've got to understand what that means for you and your company. So if you are perhaps looking for whether a branch, or whether establish a main office somewhere, that has a knock-on effect, because it might mean that you need people on the ground, and of course you've then got to look at the costs. So it's not just as a challenge as a compliance officer working out what are the rules there, how does that match to our current rule set, what have we got to change to be compliant in this new jurisdiction.
Yeah, but question, just short question, sorry for interrupting. But you said, like, you need to understand what this regulation means. So all the regulations in all the world, in all the countries, they kind of written in the same language. So like, you being British, okay, and working, for example, a lot of your life you were doing with British regulations and legislations, moving to Venezuela, I don't know, Hong Kong, wherever, you will be able to read their documents and figure out by yourself what it means for the company that you're leading, or you need somebody's help with that?
Well, you might need somebody's help, and it might be simply that you need a local lawyer. Luckily for myself and for all other English-speaking peoples, that English is the language pretty much of international business. So when you get a regulation that's to do with finance, or it doesn't necessarily have to be with crypto or banking payments, whatever it is, if it's in a country that speaks a different language from English, they usually have a direct translation available. And that is really helpful. And laws pretty much globally, and again, unfortunately, because of some shady history that the UK has in relation to its empire and the Commonwealth, and there's a huge amount of things as a country that we should be ashamed of in our history there. There is a knock-on effect in that when the UK and other European countries like Spain and Portugal went round the world establishing these colonies, they also brought with them their legal system. So yes, legal speak is very much the same around the globe, but you may need depending upon local idiosyncrasies. You may need a local lawyer. I would always say that's a good bet to make sure that your understanding is correct, because the knock-on effects of getting it wrong are too big. You can spend millions, or even if you're spending 500,000 on an application process, if you've not checked it's double right with a local lawyer or someone who's been involved in that industry before, you could be throwing 500,000 or however much you put into that project down the drain, because you might be missing something really key. So it's always better to have your work double checked. But effectively, that's what it is. It's establishing what are the rules there, how have we got to follow them, what's the culture there, how is my industry seen there. And that's certainly something like crypto. We have to think that every time we go to a new jurisdiction. How are we perceived there? What sort of scrutiny will we get? Will we be perceived as the bad guys? By going to this jurisdiction, will our payment partners stand off and say, whoa, 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 hang on a minute, you're going to a jurisdiction we're not comfortable with? So yeah, we can keep servicing your other jurisdictions that you're established, but there's no way. And then you've got to think about establishing banking and payment rails there. So it really depends upon your industry, the type of company you are, the size you are, because you might be a global entity that has a world-renowned reputation and governments want you there, and they'll be pressurizing the regulator to fast track your application because they want HSBC in their country or whatever, you know, they want it. So it depends upon your size and your reputation already as well. But generally, it's most compliance teams should have a regulatory affairs team or a team that does research. One of the bosses says, I'm thinking about Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, Singapore. Then that team gets into action and starts researching what is required there. What are the costs going to be? Do we need feet on the ground? Do we need offices? Are we going to need local legal representation? Are there translations involved that we need? How much money is it going to cost? Because I've got to then go to my boss and say, look, one, this research is going to cost money because I've got to get a legal opinion, which is going to be $20,000. So you've got to think about the whole thing. And very much it's project management and research.
Okay, got it. So we keep mentioning crypto. You're working for a crypto company now. Yeah. So first of all, maybe if you can just explain a little bit about the company itself, because we definitely, since we're talking with you, we want to promote your company as well. So just
right. Yeah, CXIO is an owner-founder company. We don't have any investments. We are not completely owned by our owner and our founder. It was founded in 2013. Prior to that, our owner and founder was involved with, it's a really interesting story in the crypto industry. And on our website, you can find a whole history of how it happened. But our founder decided to get involved, started a company called GHashIO, and he set up a crypto mining facility in Ukraine. And that was right at the start of the inception of crypto, and it did very well indeed. And he's a very, very clever gentleman. And he managed to make a small fortune off that. But he had to come to a stop because there's a huge risk in the crypto industry or any financial industry of when somebody owns over a certain amount, normally the 51% rule. When you own over a certain amount, you then start to control the industry. And the owner of our company, he was getting close to that 51% of creating so many Bitcoin that he nearly owned.
Okay.
And he had to take a step back and think, I'm going to ruin my own industry here if I don't do something different, if I keep going ahead with this very profitable. And so he took a step back and he created CXIO, a crypto exchange, wanting to bring crypto to users globally, to kind of walk them through the process. Crypto is confusing, you know. You speak to your family members about crypto and they probably don't understand what it is. And most of them will say, well, how does it have value? Because nothing exists. And you get all of these questions about it. And so he felt that if he could guide people through that mire and through that jungle of what it is and help keep them safe at the same time, follow regulation, try and fit in with, I mean, there's a big thing that crypto, you know, decentralized finance, we're going to out banking and all that kind of stuff, and we're going to take over the world. Well, in reality, that's not really the case. If you want to be part of the world's financial system, you've got to be willing to work alongside those existing entities, because it's all very well having a world's fortune in crypto, but how can you buy, I mean, nowadays, yes, you can go and pay certain car companies and whatever, but how can you buy a Lamborghini if you can't turn it into fiat, into cash? So the relationship and the symbiotic relationship between traditional finance, who view crypto with kind of raised eyebrows, and this is a huge risk, just like they did with money service businesses.
Still,
yeah, especially since things like FTX occurred. You know, in the news, that was one of the largest crypto exchanges, and if that can be so badly run or so have so many problems where it's lost all of its money and the investments, look, I don't want to make any comments that's going to get me into any legal trouble, but they make actions. And that's one of the biggest crypto firms. All the banks, all of the regulators around the globe, and say, well, if we can't trust them, who can we trust in crypto? And so then it's incumbent upon the existing crypto firms to prove their worth again. And you've got to work hand in hand with regulators and to get that story. So anyway, crypto's been around for quite a while. CEX has been around since 2000, one of the longest standing exchanges. And we want to help guide our customers and hold their hand through what can be a very confusing journey if you don't know about crypto. If you're a professional investor, our level of knowledge can match yours, and we can help you with liquidity, and we can help with investment opportunities and where to go and partnerships. And so we kind of cater to all, whether you're a brand new starter or whether you're a long established institutionalized investor, then you know the platform's there to help guide you through that process and try and make it as easy as possible.
So why did you switch from like a more traditional financial institution to, I mean, you went there, what, in 2020, right?
Yes, yeah, December
so
2020.
it was already kind of regulated. I mean, the first regulation started for crypto started appearing in like 2013, but still it was still not very clear by that time. Is it going to be regulated as, you know, investments, as like value keeping things, or as actual currency that is being exchanged? It was still very unclear industry. How should we bring it to the white side of the economics, right? Or is it something that only bad guys are using to conceal their money? So why did you go there? What was so appealing for you as a compliance person?
So a few things really. So personally, any new challenge, you know, I never wanted to be that compliance officer that's been working for a bank for 40 years. I want to constantly test myself. But one of the biggest things is, if you remember what I was saying kind of when we first started talking about understanding that it's a real thing, organized crime, and it's not just in the movies. Understanding my adversaries, I know that when a new financial instrument comes out, and it doesn't matter what, it's one of the reasons I moved to e-money from traditional trust and service businesses, was when there's a new payment side or a new facet to the financial industry, not only are there thousands of entrepreneurs around the world looking at it going, I can have a slice of this. You can bet your bottom dollar that criminals and money launderers around the world are saying, we've got to have a slice of this too. And so when you get a new financial instrument, no matter what it is, or new part of the financial industry, it's almost like it's the front line, the Wild West. Regulation isn't properly formed, like you said. Yes, you're starting to get some smatterings of it, but there's very different kind of understandings globally of how it should be regulated. This is all the type of thing, this level of confusion, the glacial pace of how long it takes to form regulation. These are all things that the money launderer and the organized criminal are very aware of. And they think that if you can get in at the start of an industry, you can move a lot of money before people start to notice. So I know that this is the front line in the Wild West. I know this is where my adversaries are going to be placing themselves. So we've got to have industry professionals who spent a lifetime trying to chase these people and try and protect the larger society and community. We've got to have people like me who say, okay, I'm going to strap on my 6-shooter and I'm going to head to the Wild West too, because not anybody else can help protect the industry from these people. And, you know, although there are wins and losses, you've got to have people like myself in these cutting edge industries, because you can bet your bottom dollar that it will be full of people trying to take advantage of it. And it will just fail if there aren't people here who say, yeah, okay, I'm going to speak to the government. We're going to help try and guide them in how to do their regulation. We're going to answer consultation papers. We're going to give them our level of knowledge to help try and formulate something that can be protected against these people. You know, especially when you're talking about higher risk things, and there is no doubt that, you know, the volatility of the crypto market does make it a higher risk side of it. And so you've got to think about that, in that it's new and people might think, oh, I can make a quick buck here. Those are the people that are really vulnerable to being scammed. Organized criminals and money launderers know this. And so you've got to have someone who's there, who's hopefully going to be able to at least take some steps to stop that from happening and the industry from completely being taken over by these type of people. Now, the beauty of it is actually, and the sneaky side of crypto, is it's based on blockchains. And a lot of criminals don't understand that, you know, you make it, if you have someone who can understand how to trace that through the blockchains, you're leaving a pile of breadcrumbs, and it's nowhere near as safe as traditional finance to launder your money. And so, unfortunately, some don't understand that. Some do, and they know how to abuse it as well, because, you know, criminals don't, you know, they're not just static themselves. Organized criminals aren't static. And just like our industry and our professionalism, it moves through the ages. So you get younger people taking over as bosses from older generations. And those younger people have grown up on their mobile phones. They've grown up with technology. And so when something like crypto comes along, that's interesting to them as well. So technology is becoming much more interesting to these people, because it's generational too, as well, organized crime and money laundering. And so the people that are our adversaries are getting younger. They're more technically savvy. They're going to take advantage of things like crypto if they can. And so that's one of the reasons that I moved to crypto, is that there's always got to be someone who's willing to stand. Yes, it's confusing. I've been in crypto 2 years, and every day's still a school day for me. You know, I pretty much learn something new every day. But those same patterns and the understanding of how the mind and the psychology of our adversaries work helps us protect our systems in the new industry.
What is the coolest thing that you learned in these 2 years in the crypto company? I don't know, some cool investigation that you did, or something that you would never think that would be connected to crypto and in regulation or in crime or anything, something, I don't know, cool anecdote.
So I think one of the coolest things actually links into something I said only a few minutes ago. And that's the ability of how blockchains work, and at the infancy, really, how organized crime and even state-sanctioned terrorism doesn't necessarily understand that. And so there's been some nice big early wins. So, for example, I don't know if you remember the Mueller report about foreign entities trying to swerve how the US presidential elections went. And who ended up in office as president. And there was a lot of influence and a lot of stuff in social media going on. And there's the Mueller report was an investigation into how that happened, and to try and bring those to justice who tried to influence the US elections. Crypto played a big part in that, you know, following those breadcrumbs in the blockchain and our expertise. Not just ourselves, several other crypto exchanges assisted with the investigation. But we helped bring these people to justice because we understand the blockchain. We understand how to follow those breadcrumbs. So it's a real nice early win and a real beautiful proving of when you get something that's the blockchain. And this also shows the power of the blockchain, really, and it's why other banks and central governments are looking at adopting a blockchain, whether they use it for crypto, whether they use it for own digital. There's a reason behind that. And it just shows the beauty of it. And it's almost like a global symmetry as to it doesn't matter if you do something here or try and forge your side of the blockchain, it's not going to match up with what's on the other side of the planet and all the other millions of users. So we can track you and we can catch you. And I think that was one of the nicest ones, you know, especially early on in the kind of life cycle of what crypto is. It shows early on, it showed the power, you know, massive. No government should ever mess with the elections of another government. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of that because we've done that plenty of times in the West as well. But when it happened in the US, it was nice to be part of the investigation to help the Department of Defense in building a case and being able to provide evidence. And I think that's a really nice way to prove that we can be of assistance.
It seems that this year, 2023, it's like it's a year of crypto in regulations, because I'm seeing all this news from everywhere. Okay, UK, Hong Kong, states, all of them are saying we're finally figured it out. We're gonna regulate crypto, the hell out of crypto. We know how to do it. Where do you think it's all going this year? What do you think? Where we will end up?
So it's still in its infancy, and I mean, if you look at most crypto firms, pretty much are technology firms first before they're financial firms. They're part of how you establish the blockchain and the technology behind that, and different tokens and smart contracts. If you have different types of tokens that can utilize smart contracts, it's a technological industry as well as a financial industry. And I think working with regulators hopefully will get them to understand that as well. You can't just say, look, here are our banking and payment rules that have been around for 20 and 45 years, and now you've just got to adopt them within a couple of years, because that's not going to work with crypto companies. It's a different environment that has different risk areas and risk points. But there's got to be regulation. Like I said, a lot of people think DeFi, that's it. This is our freedom from traditional finance and governments and whatever. But I mean, and that's a nice view depending upon where you stand. But in reality, if you want to be part of the world market, you've got to accept that there's going to be a period of time where regulation hits you, and it hits you hard. Now, the problems that come with that are, if the governments aren't talking to each other, if they are not coming up with a standardized way of looking at things, you're going to end up with crypto firms that are going to have to follow different rules at different parts around the world. And that's going to be very, very expensive from a compliance point of view. So early engagement with regulators is a real answer, because there's no doubt they have to regulate it. I mean, we have to protect our investors, one, from criminals and organized criminals and scams, but two, from themselves. You know, I mean, there's a reason why marketing rules and compliance exist, you know. We've all have a family member, I can think of mine now, who would look at an advert on their phone and say, oh, I can make that much, and they would start pressing the buttons to see what they can do with it.
Yeah, pig butchering, the biggest thing right now. Pig butchering. Have you heard about this new scheme that involves crypto?
I haven't. No, go on.
Pig butchering is it's actually, it says that it comes from China. They actually use trafficked people as the bad guys in this scheme. What they do, they communicate with people, say in UK and USA. They find them through dating sites, sometimes through like, they can even send like a WhatsApp message as if it's a mistake. Then they keep personal relationship with this person. If it's dating, it's called pig butchering because they fatten the pig. So they get them to invest into crypto. Then they create fake crypto exchanges where they make those people to transfer all of their money as if they actually investing, and they playing, you know, with the crypto, and they actually getting a lot of money out of it because it's a fake exchange. So they just show them fake figures that they as if they making that. And at the point where finally they got this person out of all of their funds, and sometimes it's like millions of dollars. Sometimes they able to make people all of their, like, put their all of their savings, take loans, you know, put them into this. Then they just take all of this money and they disappear. And it's one of the most horrible crimes lately, because it's vulnerable people, lonely people who are looking for a partner, and it's a crime based on trust. And the people who are actually involved in this, like not the beneficiaries, but the people who have to communicate, in many cases, these are trafficked people that have to do it because they are being threatened, or their families being threatened. So from both sides, and it involves crypto. It's not real crypto exchanges, but it involves the fact that not a lot of people understand how this industry works. So they know that they can make a quick buck, and they're being shown that they can make a quick buck, but they don't understand what is actually happening. So
okay, so it sounds very much like just a different name for what we call dating scams. But that taking advantage of the investor has long been in any way. You go back to the old 419 scams from Nigeria of I'm the housemaiden for a prince, and I need to get this money out for them because otherwise it's going to be seized by the state. From that into forming a long relationship through dating scams, which is a big problem, to just generally obfuscating themselves as well. Any type of scam like this as a professional investor. But to be honest, using crypto for that is not always beneficial for people because, like I said, it leaves breadcrumbs. Just this other week, I'm not going to give any details, but just this last week, from March 22 last year, we started assisting in an investigation that came up in Poland. And I heard from the NCA just the other day that we've managed to find the money from the help that we gave and all the information, and they've managed to locate the money. It's been seized, and the person has got their life savings back. All because of the power of the blockchain, and we can track where things have gone. But this is a scam that's as old as finance, It's look at some of the big cases of investment scams with people like Bernie Madoff, and how he started his investment scam. That was people being scammed into making more money, and they were bought in on a personal level because it was friends of. Yes, it's not a romantic relationship, but it's a trust of a human because of a relationship you have, whether that's a family relationship. And they abuse this all the time. And they say, and they'll come across and they'll say, I'm a proper investment house, I'm a proper crypto exchange. We even get, one of the things at the moment is customer service piggybacking. We'll have people come on to, especially in this age of technology where you can contact a company via Telegram, Slack, WhatsApp, online, via chat, whatever. There's scammers who take advantage of that. They pretend to be customer service people. Hi, we're really sorry you've been in the queue for a while. I saw your name and I saw you were really frustrated, so I thought I'd pick you out. How can I help you get your money? Oh, I'm going to need your account number and login for that. The abuse of the good side of human nature, especially when it involves like something like romantic or dating, which seems to hit a little harder because, in our romantic lives, I would think it's very rare that you have someone who gets to a certain age has not had rocky patches through their romantic. It's a stressful place to be. So being given that promise on top of losing all of your funds it's emotionally destroying, but we've seen this many times before. Crypto is a new conduit for it, but it's been happening in traditional finance for many, many years as
well. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, this was very, very interesting, and I asked you a lot of questions that I always wanted to ask you, through all of these years.
You're very welcome.
Anything else you want to add? You want to ask? I don't know.
Well, what I would say is it is a stressful time in crypto at the minute because of things like the collapse of FTX. And some other scandals that have been. The industry is under a lot of scrutiny. If you're a compliance officer, the message is stick with it. There's a reason why the regulators are nervous, and it's our job to help educate them and bring them to a level of comfort. at the end of the day, the regulators are just trying to protect normal people, normal investors, normal bankers, not people who use the financial services. And who wouldn't want that? I know it's a pain and it makes it busier and it feels like you're fighting fires every day as a compliance officer because you've got to answer this regulator. All of a sudden you're getting audited here simply because you're a crypto company and they're scared of crypto and now they want to audit, and you're getting so much focus. I think, you know, and you're very, very busy and it's very hard to do your day to day because you seem to be fighting a lot of regulatory fires. Understand why it's happening. It's happening because ultimately regulators have a remit to protect the investor. And the investors are people that we all know. They're our relatives, our friends, our parents, our work colleagues. And who wouldn't want to protect them? You know, they're members of society. So yes, crypto is going through a tough time. It's under a huge amount of scrutiny. The pressure on compliance officers is very, very high, especially in a time of when we've just been experiencing a crypto winter. You know, companies aren't spending as much money on compliance and technical solutions because they're not making as much money. And so the pressure is very, very high. But when you're under that pressure, remember why we're doing it. We're all in the same team. You know, the regulators aren't your adversary. They're your colleagues, effectively. We've got to work together. And I hope regulators remember that as well, because I have noticed a change in some regulator attitude as well towards crypto, that have gone from, oh, this is a new industry, it's interesting, to, oh my goodness, panic, we're going to punish you. And I've seen quite a different change. So regulators as well, I'd implore you, work with us. You know, we all want the same thing, which is to stop our financial services from being used by criminals and organized crime and scamming our people, but also protecting the general consumer on a day-to-day basis from about making good decisions. So we really should all work together, and it's we'll get there. It's a journey. It's happening very, very quickly, but there's still a few years to go, and we're going to be under pressure. But it's exciting, and we can help make a difference.
Thank you very much.